I polished the mahogany bar top for the fourth time tonight, the scent of lemon oil mixing with the perpetual aroma of chicory coffee and beignet that defined Café Obscura. The antique clock behind me, all brass gears and Roman numerals, showed 11:34 p.m., and the French Quarter establishment was experiencing what my coworker Rue called a twilight lull, those rare October nights when even the usual late-night revelers seem to evaporate into the humid Louisiana air. Only 5 tables occupied in a space that could easily hold 50. "You're going to rub the finish right off that wood if you keep at it," Rue said, materializing beside me with a tray of empty glasses balanced on one hip. Her dark curls were piled high in a messy bun secured with what looked like vintage chopsticks. "Seriously, Yuliya. It's gleaming. Has been since the last 4 times you buffed it." I set down the cloth, noticing the way my fingers trembled slightly around the antique watch locket that hung from my neck, the only piece of my past my mother had ever shared with me. 26 years working at this cafe, living in this city, and I still couldn't settle during quiet shifts. The silence created space for questions I'd spent those same 26 years learning not to ask. "Sorry. Just restless." "You're always restless." She poured herself a glass of the sweet tea that had been steeping since sunset. "But tonight you're extra restless. What's going on in that mysterious head of yours?" Before I could answer, the atmosphere changed. I felt it before I saw anything. A shift in the air pressure, a sudden tension that made every supernatural creature in the cafe go absolutely still. The vampire couple in the corner booth froze mid-conversation. The werewolf line cook visible through the kitchen window stopped chopping. Even the jazz music from the speakers seemed to drop in volume. The antique door opened, its old hinges releasing their customary creak, but the bell above it didn't chime. It never chimed for them. 4 figures entered, and they transformed Café Obscura as completely as if someone had rewritten the laws of physics. The first 3 moved like shadows, dark suits, darker eyes, scanning the restaurant with the predatory awareness of apex predators mapping territory. Their skin held that particular luminous quality that marked them as vampire aristocracy, old enough that sunlight was a distant memory rather than a daily threat. But it was the 4th man who commanded every molecule of attention in the room. He stood perhaps 6'3", moving with a grace that suggested centuries of practice, making every gesture deliberate, economical, perfect. Platinum white hair fell past his shoulders in a straight cascade that caught the cafe's amber lighting like spun moonlight. He wore a cream-colored suit that looked like it had been tailored in a different century, all intricate brocade and subtle embroidery that probably cost more than I'd earn in a decade. His face could have been carved from marble by a master sculptor obsessed with capturing cold perfection. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath. Even from across the room I could see they were pale, gray or silver, impossible to tell in this light, and ancient. Eyes that had watched empires rise and crumble, that had seen things I couldn't begin to imagine. "Sweet merciful hell," Rue whispered beside me, her voice strangled. No, this can't be happening." "What? Who is he?" My own voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "That's Armen Vartan." Her fingers found my wrist, gripping hard enough to leave marks. "The Vampire King. He rules New Orleans, Yuliya. Not officially, not in any way humans would recognize, but everyone who matters knows. Vampires, werewolves, witches, we all answer to him. You do not want his attention." But our manager, Bissett, a nervous human who'd somehow earned the right to run a supernatural establishment, was already approaching them, bowing slightly in a show of deference that made my stomach turn. The Vampire King said something too quiet for me to hear, and Bissett's eyes swept the cafe before landing on my section. Of course. Of the 5 occupied tables, 4 were clustered in Rue's section near the kitchen, which meant mine. The corner booths near the old windows overlooking Rue Dauphine was the obvious choice for a party of 4 wanting privacy and a strategic position. "I'll take them," Rue said quickly, already moving. "I'll tell Bissett there was a mix-up with sections." "It's fine. They're just customers." The words came out steadier than I felt, and I hated the tremor I heard underneath them. Rue's expression said she wanted to argue, wanted to physically drag me away from what was clearly a terrible idea. But Bissett was already gesturing toward the corner booth. The best table in the house, the one with its back to the solid brick wall and clear sight lines to both entrances. And the Vampire King was moving toward it with liquid grace, his 3 companions arranging themselves in positions that suggested military precision. I grabbed 4 leather-bound menus from the hostess stand, my fingers automatically checking that my locket was tucked safely beneath my collar where it always rested. My mother had given it to me when I was too young to remember, told me never to lose it, never to open it where others could see. 26 years of obeying that instruction, and the weight of it against my skin was as familiar as breathing. I approached the table hyper-aware of my scuffed work boots and the ink stain on my black apron that I'd tried and failed to wash out last week. The Vampire King didn't look up as I drew closer. He was studying his phone, his expression unreadable, one elegant hand resting on the table in a way that drew attention to the antique rings on his fingers. Up close he was even more overwhelming. His presence seemed to fill the space, making the air thick and charged like the moments before lightning strikes. I could feel power radiating from him in waves, making my skin prickle with awareness of something I didn't understand. "Good evening," I managed, surprised my voice worked at all. "Can I start you gentlemen with something to drink?" One of the companions, dark-haired, sharp-featured, with eyes like obsidian, ordered in a voice like gravel, "4 glasses of your private reserve. The Chateau Margaux." I blinked. We didn't serve wine. Café Obscura was known for coffee, cocktails, and the companion's expression shifted slightly and I understood. Not wine for drinking. Blood. The private reserve was kept in a locked refrigerator in the back, stored in wine bottles for discretion, donated by willing humans who visited the café for exactly that purpose. "Of course," I said, writing it down though I didn't need to. "I'll bring that right out." The Vampire King still hadn't looked up from his phone. His 3 companions exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them that I couldn't interpret. I waited, pen hovering over my notepad, professional training warring with the instinct to flee that was screaming in the back of my mind. Finally, one of them cleared his throat softly. "Sir." The Vampire King's eyes lifted from his screen, and the full force of his attention landed on me like a physical blow. I forgot how to breathe. Those pale eyes held mine, and I felt seen in a way I'd never experienced, like he was reading every secret I'd ever kept, every question I'd never dared to ask, every moment of feeling like I didn't quite fit in my own skin. The moment stretched, suspended in amber, and I watched something flicker across his perfect features. Not quite surprise. Not quite recognition. Something else entirely. "Scotch," he said finally, his voice low and measured, with the barest trace of an accent I couldn't place. Something old, something that predated modern borders. "Neat. The Macallan if you have it." "We don't serve hard liquor, sir. Beer, wine, and specialty cocktails only." Something that might have been amusement crossed his face, gone too quickly to name. "Then water will suffice." I wrote it down, hands somehow steady despite everything. "I'll be right back with those." Turning away felt like breaking a spell, like stepping out of a frozen moment back into normal time. I could feel his eyes on me as I walked toward the bar, my shoulders tight with an awareness that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with prey recognizing a predator. Rue intercepted me before I could reach the private refrigerator. "Yuliya, are you insane? Do you have any idea what he could do to you?" "He ordered drinks, Rue. I'm bringing him drinks. That's literally my job. That man doesn't need drinks. That man doesn't do anything without a reason, and whatever brought him to Café Obscura tonight, it's not thirst." She glanced over my shoulder toward the corner booth, then back at me. "There are stories about him. Old stories. Terrible stories. He's been alive for over 1,000 years, maybe longer. He's killed things that would make your nightmares seem like pleasant dreams." I filled a glass with ice water from the filtered pitcher, buying time to steady myself. "He's a customer. That's all I need to know." "You're impossible," she muttered, but she stepped aside to let me pass, her expression twisted with worry. I retrieved the private reserve from the locked refrigerator, 4 bottles of donated blood disguised as expensive Bordeaux, and loaded them onto a tray along with crystal glasses and the Vampire King's ice water. My hands were steady now, muscle memory taking over, the professional mask I'd perfected over 26 years of service work sliding into place. As I approached the table again, the Vampire King was speaking in low tones to his companions, his attention on whatever he was saying. I set down the glasses first, then began opening the bottles with practiced efficiency. And that's when it happened. My locket, the watch locket I'd worn every single day for as long as I could remember, chose that exact moment to slip from beneath my collar where I'd tucked it. I felt the chain catch on the button of my uniform shirt, felt the familiar weight pull free and swing forward. I grabbed for it instinctively, but my fingers only managed to knock it further away. It bounced once on the edge of the table and landed directly on the surface in front of the Vampire King. Time seemed to stop. His hand closed around it, not aggressively but with absolute finality. Those long, elegant fingers curled around the silver oval, and he lifted it with the same focused attention he'd given the restaurant when he first entered. "I'm so sorry," I said, reaching across to retrieve it, professional embarrassment flooding through me. "Please, He didn't respond. Instead, with deliberate slowness, he opened the locket. I watched his expression change. It was subtle, on a face as controlled as his. Everything was subtle, but I saw it happen. The tightening around those pale eyes. The muscle jumping in his jaw. The way his breathing stopped entirely for 3 full seconds before resuming. He stared at the photograph inside. The faded image I'd looked at 1,000 times, 2 babies wrapped in blankets, their faces barely visible, and I watched something crack in his ancient composure. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes held an emotion I couldn't name but felt in my bones, like recognition, like destiny, like the moment before everything changes forever. "Where did you get this?" The question was quiet, but it cut through the ambient noise of the cafe like a blade. At the other tables, supernatural creatures were turning to stare. At the counter, Rue had gone very still. Even the jazz music seemed to fade into silence. "It's mine," I said, fighting to keep my voice level, professional. "A friend gave it to me. Now please, I need it back." His fingers tightened imperceptibly on the locket. He looked down at the photograph again, his expression transforming into something cold and dangerous and devastating. "That's my son's face," he said, his voice rough with an emotion that sounded like centuries of grief compressed into 3 words. The cafe erupted into whispers. Vampires and werewolves and witches all suddenly alert, all suddenly interested in a way that made my skin crawl. I stared at him, not understanding, my mind refusing to process what he was saying. "That's impossible. I've had this since I was a child." "You're mistaken." "I am not mistaken." He stood in one fluid motion and his companions immediately rose with him, hands moving toward weapons I couldn't see but knew were there. "There are 2 babies in this photograph. This one." His finger touched the image with shocking gentleness. "This is Norair. My son. But there are 2. His eyes found mine again, and this time I saw it. The recognition, the calculation, the absolute certainty of someone who'd lived long enough to recognize truth when it slapped him in the face. "You have his eyes," he said softly, and the words fell like hammer blows. "Your brother's eyes. The same shade. The same shape. The same." "I don't have a brother," I interrupted, but even as I said it, I felt something crack open inside me. Some locked door I'd always known was there but never had the key to open. The Vampire King, Armen Vartan, reached across the table with his free hand, not touching me, but holding it out in a gesture that was somehow both commanding and entreating. "Don't run," he said quietly. "Don't scream. Don't make this difficult. Just sit down and let me explain something that will change everything you think you know about yourself." Behind me, I heard Rue moving, heard Bissett on the phone speaking rapidly in French, heard the scrape of chairs as other patrons either fled or settled in to watch what happened next. But I couldn't move. Could only stand there, frozen, staring at this ancient vampire who held my locket, my mother's locket, and was looking at me like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking for 26 years. "Sit," he said again, and this time it wasn't a request. My legs folded before I'd consciously decided to obey, lowering me into the booth across from him. The leather was cold through my thin work pants, but I barely felt it. Armen Vartan set the locket carefully on the table between us, still open, the photograph of 2 infants looking up at both of us like an accusation. "My name is Armen Vartan," he said, his voice formal now, controlled, though I could hear something trembling underneath. "And if that locket contains what I think it contains, then 26 years ago someone stole my daughter and convinced me she was dead." He paused, his pale eyes holding mine with an intensity that made my lungs forget how to work. "Which means, Yuliya Praskovia, that you are not human. You are not ordinary. You are my child, half vampire, half werewolf, and your very existence is about to turn this city's supernatural world inside out." The cafe spun slightly. I gripped the edge of the table, fighting against the wave of dizziness that threatened to pull me under. Because somewhere deep inside me, in a place I'd always tried to ignore, something whispered that he was telling the truth. And if he was telling the truth, then everything I thought I knew about myself was a lie. The world tilted sideways and I realized distantly that I was hyperventilating. The cafe's warm amber lighting seemed to strobe, growing brighter and dimmer in rhythm with my racing pulse. Armen Vartan's words echoed in my skull like a death knell. Half vampire, half werewolf, my child, not human, not ordinary. This is insane, I managed, my voice coming out strangled. You're insane. I'm 26 years old. I've lived in New Orleans my entire life. I would know if I wasn't human. One of his companions supplied the word I couldn't force past my lips. He was a mountain of a man with a shaved head and a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, watching me with eyes that held something between pity and professional assessment. You'd be surprised what the mind can rationalize when survival depends on it. Armen raised one pale hand and the companion fell silent immediately. The Vampire King's attention never left my face, studying me with an intensity that made me feel like a specimen under glass. Tell me, he said quietly, have you never wondered why you can see perfectly in darkness that leaves others blind? Why you've never been sick not once in your entire life? Why certain sounds make your teeth ache, certain smells make your pulse race, certain full moons leave you restless and agitated in ways you can't explain? My mouth went dry. Because yes to all of it. Things I'd dismissed as coincidence, as genetics, as nothing more than quirks of biology that didn't bear examination. Lots of people have good night vision, I said, but the words sounded weak even to me. Not like yours. Armen leaned forward slightly and I caught a scent that made something deep in my chest respond. Old paper and night-blooming jasmine and something else. Something that whispered family in a language I didn't know I spoke. And they certainly don't have a heartbeat that fluctuates between 45 and 70 beats per minute depending on the time of day. Which for the record yours is doing right now. How could he possibly know that? Unless. I can hear it, he said, answering my unspoken question. Just as you're beginning to hear mine. Or rather, hear the absence of it. I focused on him despite every instinct screaming at me to run. Listened past my own thundering pulse, past the whispered conversations erupting around us, past the jazz music that had started up again from the speakers. And there was nothing. No heartbeat. No breath. Just ancient, patient silence wrapped in flesh that mimicked life. No, I whispered. No, this isn't, I can't be. Armen reached across the table, his movement deliberate enough to give me time to pull away. When I couldn't, frozen like prey before a predator, his cool fingers closed gently around my wrist. The contact detonated something inside me. Suddenly I could hear everything. The rapid-fire heartbeats of the human couple 3 tables away. The slower, stronger pulse of Rue behind the bar. The werewolf cook's heartbeat syncopating with something wilder, something that ran on 4 legs under the full moon. I could smell blood, so much blood, pumping through veins and arteries all around me, warm and copper-sweet and calling to something that unfurled inside my chest like wings I'd never known I had. And underneath it all I smelled wolf. Fur and wild places and the green scent of forests under moonlight. Coming from me. Coming from inside me. No, I gasped, trying to pull away, but Armen's grip tightened just enough to hold me steady. Breathe, he commanded, his voice cutting through the sensory chaos. Focus on my voice. Let everything else fade to background noise. Breathe. I tried. God, I tried. But the world was too loud, too bright, too much. My vision sharpened until I could see individual dust motes dancing in the light, could count the threads in Armen's expensive suit, could see the faint tracery of veins beneath Rue's skin from 15 feet away. The scarred companion moved closer, concern evident in his granite features. Sir, she's going to. I know, Savak. Armen's other hand came up to cup my face, forcing me to meet his eyes. They were pale silver now, catching the light like mirrors, and looking into them was like falling into a frozen lake. Yuliya. Look at me. Only me. Everything else is just noise. But the noise was inside me now, clawing its way up from some deep place I'd kept locked and chained without even knowing it existed. I felt my canines lengthening, sharpening. Felt something in my spine trying to shift, to change. Felt the overwhelming urge to run, to hunt, to. Savak, clear the room, Armen said, his tone absolutely calm despite what must have been visible in my face. Tell Bissett to close early. Compensate everyone for their trouble. The scarred vampire moved with supernatural speed, and suddenly the cafe was emptying. Patrons ushered out with quiet efficiency, Rue and Bissett retreating to the kitchen, the front door locked and the closed sign flipped with professional precision. Please, I managed, though I wasn't sure what I was begging for. For this to stop. For it to not be real. For my mother to appear and tell me this was all some terrible mistake. I'm sorry, Armen said, and he actually sounded like he meant it. The suppression magic your mother used is breaking down. It happens when hybrids reach full maturity. There's no stopping it now, only managing the transition. The room was spinning faster now, colors bleeding together like wet paint. My skin felt too tight, like I was being squeezed into a shape that didn't fit anymore. The last thing I saw before darkness swallowed me was Armen catching me as I fell, his ancient face creased with an emotion that looked almost like grief. Then nothing. I woke to silk sheets and the scent of old wood and older magic. My eyes opened onto a ceiling painted with constellations that seemed to move when I watched them, stars wheeling across painted heavens in slow, hypnotic patterns. The bed beneath me was larger than my entire apartment's bedroom, draped in midnight blue fabric that whispered against my skin like water. I sat up slowly, my head surprisingly clear despite everything that had happened. The room around me could have been transplanted from a gothic romance. All dark wood and heavy curtains, antique furniture that probably belonged in a museum, and windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, currently covered by drapes that blocked out what I assumed was daylight. A door opened to my left and Armen Vartan entered carrying a tray. He'd removed his suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and somehow managed to look both less intimidating and more dangerous in the casual state. You're awake, he observed, setting the tray on a side table. Good. I wasn't certain how long the sensory overload would keep you under. It varies with hybrids. I pulled the sheets closer, suddenly aware I was still wearing my work uniform, rumpled now and smelling of the cafe. Where am I? My home. The Garden District. He poured something from a crystal decanter into a glass. Water. You should drink. Your body is processing significant changes. I didn't move. Couldn't move. Because accepting the water would mean accepting this was real, that I was sitting in the Vampire King's mansion, that everything he'd said might actually be true. Armen seemed to understand my hesitation. He took a sip from the glass himself, proof it wasn't poisoned or drugged, then set it on the nightstand within my reach. I imagine you have questions, he said, settling into a chair near the bed with the kind of patience that came from having all the time in the world. Just one. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Are you telling me the truth? Is my mother really a werewolf? Do I really have a twin brother? Am I really... I couldn't finish the sentence. Pie daughter. Armen's expression softened fractionally. Yes. To all of it. Your mother is Gianna Praskovia, werewolf diplomat who disappeared 26 years ago with one of my newborn children. Your brother is Norair Vartan, currently serving as my primary enforcer. And you? His pale eyes held mine. You are Yuliya Vartan, though you've lived your entire life as Yuliya Praskovia. Half vampire. Half werewolf. The first of your kind to survive past infancy in over a century. The words should have sounded absurd. Instead they resonated like truth I'd always known but never let myself acknowledge. Before I could respond, before I could even process what any of this meant, a commotion erupted from somewhere deeper in the mansion. Raised voices. The sound of supernatural creatures moving with purpose. And underneath it all, a sound that made something in my chest pull tight. A woman's voice, familiar despite 26 years of careful control, demanding entry with the kind of authority that came from having nothing left to lose. Armen stood in one fluid motion, his entire demeanor shifting from gentle to dangerous in a heartbeat. It seems, he said quietly, your mother has arrived. The confrontation happened in Armen's study, a room that smelled of leather-bound books and centuries of decisions that had shaped New Orleans' supernatural landscape. My mother stood near the massive fireplace, her back rigid with defiance, looking exactly as I remembered her and yet completely different now that I knew what she was. Gianna Praskovia had always been beautiful in a way that seemed timeless. Dark hair threaded with silver amber eyes that caught the light like a wolf's, a strength in her frame that I'd attributed to years of physical labor. Now I saw the truth beneath the careful human facade. A werewolf alpha in everything but title, power coiled beneath her skin like a spring wound too tight. You had no right, she said, her voice shaking with fury directed entirely at Armen. No right to pull her into this world. She was safe. She was happy. She was living a lie. Armen stood behind his desk, hands clasped behind his back, every inch the ancient king. And that lie was unraveling whether I intervened or not. The suppression magic was failing, Gianna. You knew this day would come. Not like this. Not with you. She turned to me then and I saw tears tracking down her face. The first time I'd ever seen my mother cry. Yuliya, sweetheart, I can explain everything. Please just come home with me. We'll figure this out together. But Armen moved between us, not threatening, simply present. She deserves the truth. From both of us. All of it. The silence stretched like a blade until finally, my mother's shoulders sagged in defeat. I was a diplomat, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. 27 years ago, the werewolf packs and vampire courts were on the brink of war. Territorial disputes, old grudges, the usual supernatural politics that get people killed. My pack sent me to negotiate with the vampire king. She looked at Armen and something passed between them. Memory, regret, the ghost of what they'd been to each other. I fell in love with him, she said simply. It was the stupidest, most dangerous thing I'd ever done. But Armen was different than I expected. Honorable. Principled. Trying to build something better than the endless cycle of violence. We kept the relationship secret, Armen continued, his voice carefully neutral. For nearly a year. And then Gianna became pregnant. My mother's laugh was bitter. With twins. The ultimate diplomatic disaster. Both sides were outraged. Vampires because I'd contaminated their king's bloodline, werewolves because I'd betrayed my pack by lying with the enemy. Extremists on both sides wanted the children destroyed before they could be born. I felt my legs give out, sinking into the leather chair behind me. But you had us anyway. We tried to protect you, Armen said, moving to the window. Fortified this estate. Brought in loyal guards. Made plans to raise you in secret until you were old enough to defend yourselves. But when you were born. His voice cracked, the first real emotion breaking through his controlled facade. Norair showed obvious vampire traits immediately. No heartbeat. Cold skin. Red-tinged eyes. He would never pass for human, could never hide in the werewolf world. But Yuliya seemed human enough, Gianna finished, her eyes finding mine. Warm. Breathing. A heartbeat that sounded normal if you didn't listen too carefully. I realized I could save one of you. Hide you among humans, suppress your supernatural heritage with magic, give you the normal life you deserved. So you fled. I heard the accusation in my own voice. You took me and left my brother behind. I saved you. Her voice rose, desperate. Norair couldn't survive where I was going. He needed blood, needed darkness, needed things only the vampire world could provide. But you could have a chance. A real life. Away from politics and violence and people who wanted you dead simply for existing. Armen turned back from the window. I let her go. It was the only way to protect either child. If I'd fought to keep Yuliya, my own court would have moved against me. Civil war. Thousands dead. And both children would have been killed in the crossfire. So you raised Norair as pure vampire, I said, the pieces falling into horrible place. Made everyone believe the hybrid children died. And let me grow up thinking I was human. I thought you were dead. Armen's pale eyes held mine. Gianna sent word months after she disappeared that you died of an illness, that the hybrid nature couldn't sustain itself. I spent 26 years believing I'd lost my daughter. And I spent 26 years lying to mine. My mother's voice broke. Every day watching you grow, wondering when the magic would fail. When you'd start showing signs. When I'd have to tell you the truth about what you are, what I am, what I did. Before I could respond, the study door opened without warning. The man who entered made the air in the room contract with his presence. Tall, platinum-haired like Armen, with features that were mirror images of my own but sharper, more angular, more predatory. His eyes were the pale silver of old mirrors, and they landed on me with the focused intensity of a hunting wolf. Father, he said, his voice cold and precise. Savak said we had a situation. Norair. Armen's expression softened fractionally. This is your sister. Yuliya. My twin brother's gaze raked over me, cataloging, assessing, finding me wanting in ways I couldn't begin to understand. My sister is dead. Has been for 26 years. She's very much alive, Armen said quietly. And she's staying here. Under my protection. Something dangerous flashed across Norair's face. You can't be serious. She appears out of nowhere claiming to be family and you just accept it? What proof do we have beyond a photograph in this wolf's? He said the word like a curse. Convenient story. The proof, Armen said with finality, is standing in front of you. She has your eyes, Norair. Your mother's features. And the twin bond is there if you'd open yourself enough to feel it. I feel nothing. But even as Norair said it, I saw his hand move to his chest, pressing against his heart as if something there had stirred against his will. The tension in the room was suffocating. I stood on shaking legs, needing air, needing space, needing anything but this room full of impossible revelations and a brother who looked at me like I was a threat to be eliminated. I need a minute, I managed, moving toward the door. Armen's hand caught my wrist gently. We're having dinner in an hour. All of us. You need to eat and we need to discuss what happens next. What happened next turned out to be a disaster. Dinner was served in a formal dining room that could have seated 40 but held only the 4 of us. Me, Armen, Norair, and Gianna in an atmosphere so tense I could barely breathe. A human servant brought courses I barely tasted, my enhanced senses making everything too intense, too overwhelming. Then the servant, a young man named Jules, returned from the kitchen with a wine bottle and a carving knife for the roast. His hand slipped. The blade caught his palm. Blood welled, bright and copper-sweet, and the smell of it hit me like a physical blow. My vision sharpened. My canines lengthened. Every muscle in my body tensed with an urge I didn't understand but couldn't resist. To hunt, to feed, to taste. I was on my feet before I knew I'd moved, crossing the room with speed that shouldn't have been possible, reaching for Jules with hands that had sprouted claws I didn't know I possessed. Norair caught me mid-lunge. His arms locked around me from behind, strong as steel bands, pulling me back against his chest. And the moment we touched, really touched skin to skin, something exploded in my mind. Images. Emotions. Memories that weren't mine flooding through me in a torrent. Norair's loneliness. His resentment. His fierce loyalty to Armen. And underneath it all, a hollow ache he'd carried for 26 years without understanding why. The twin bond snapped into place like a lock finding its key. Breathe, Norair hissed in my ear and I realized he was feeling it too, the sudden, overwhelming connection between us. Fight it. You're stronger than the bloodlust. I fought. God, I fought. And gradually, slowly, the red haze cleared enough for me to think again. Jules had fled. Gianna was on her feet, looking ready to shift into wolf form. Armen stood utterly still, watching his children with an expression of profound sorrow. Norair released me carefully, stepping back but staying close enough to intervene if needed. When I turned to face him, his expression had changed. No longer dismissive, no longer certain I was a threat. Now he looked almost afraid. You felt it, I whispered. I felt it, he confirmed, and there was something raw in his voice. The bond. Real. You're really. He couldn't finish the sentence. Before either of us could process what had happened, Savak appeared in the doorway, his scarred face grim. Sir, he said to Armen. We have a problem. The Crimson Tribunal has called an emergency session. Someone informed them about the hybrid's existence. They're convening in 30 days to decide whether she violates supernatural law. He paused. If they rule against her, execution is mandatory. No exceptions. The silence that followed was absolute. Finally, Armen spoke, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 years of command. Then Yuliya stays here. Under my protection. We have 1 month to prepare her for the tribunal, to teach her control, to present her as an asset rather than a threat. Armen, no, Gianna started. It's not a request, Gianna. He's my daughter. My responsibility. And I won't lose her again. He turned to me. Can you do this? Can you trust me to keep you safe? I looked at Norair, still feeling the echo of our connection humming between us. Looked at my mother, tears streaming down her face. Looked at Armen, ancient and powerful and utterly sincere in his determination to protect me. Do I have a choice? There's always a choice, Armen said quietly. But some choices lead to survival and others lead to graves. Gianna moved toward me one last time, cupping my face in her hands. The werewolves will come for you too, she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. Constantine Voke, the alpha who wanted you dead as an infant, he doesn't forgive and he doesn't forget. If he learns you're alive, then we'll deal with him when the time comes, Armen said with finality. My mother pressed a kiss to my forehead, whispered something in a language I didn't understand, and then she was gone, fleeing into the New Orleans night, leaving me alone with a father I'd never known and a brother who still wasn't sure I deserved to live. 1 month, I thought, looking at my trembling hands. 1 month to learn how to be something I didn't understand, to master powers I couldn't control, to convince ancient vampires that a half-breed abomination deserved to exist. 1 month to become someone worth saving. Or 1 month until my execution. Training began before dawn the next morning, in a basement chamber so deep beneath Armen's estate that even screams wouldn't carry to the surface. The space was designed for combat. Reinforced walls, padded floors, and an array of weapons that made my stomach turn. The tribunal will test you, Armen said, circling me with the measured patience of someone who had all the time in the world. Not just your abilities but your control. Show them a feral hybrid and they'll put you down like a rabid animal. Show them precision, discipline, and they might let you live. He moved without warning, supernatural speed carrying him across the room in a blur. I barely registered his presence before his hand was at my throat. Not squeezing, just resting there with gentle pressure that could become lethal in an instant. Your senses are awakening, he said, releasing me. But they're useless if you can't process the information fast enough to act. Again. We repeated the exercise 50 times. 100. I lost count. Each time, Armen attacked from a different angle, forcing me to rely on hearing, smell, the subtle displacement of air that preceded movement. Gradually, painfully, I began to anticipate him. Not perfectly, he'd been doing this for over a millennium, but enough that I could sometimes dodge, sometimes block, sometimes at least see the strike coming before it landed. Norair watched from the shadows, his pale eyes tracking every movement with predatory focus. When Armen finally called a break, my twin brother stepped forward with 2 crystal glasses filled with dark liquid that smelled like copper and iron. Drink, he said, handing me one. Your body is burning energy faster than normal food can replace it. You need blood. I stared at the glass, my stomach churning with revulsion and something else, hunger that made my canines ache and my throat burn. It's from a willing donor, Norair added, his tone carrying a hint of impatience. Human volunteers who come to the estate specifically for this purpose. They're compensated, screened for diseases, and never harmed beyond the initial draw. This is how civilized vampires feed. I brought the glass to my lips with shaking hands. The first taste was overwhelming, sweet and metallic and alive in a way nothing had ever been. Something in my chest roared with satisfaction, with rightness, with the certainty that this was what I was meant to consume. I drained the glass in 3 swallows. When I lowered it, Norair was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Better? He asked quietly. Yes, I admitted, hating how true it was. God help me, yes. Something shifted in his expression. Approval maybe, or recognition. The revulsion will fade. Eventually this will feel as natural as drinking water. More natural actually for what we are. Over the following days the training intensified. Armen taught me vampire etiquette, the complex hierarchy of bows and honorifics, which elders deserved deference, how to navigate conversation without accidentally issuing challenges or insults. Norair taught me everything else. Father wants you to survive the tribunal, my twin said during one late-night session, both of us bloody and exhausted from sparring. I want you to survive after the tribunal. That means learning to be lethal. He showed me where to strike to incapacitate vampires. The spine just below the skull, the heart from angles that avoided the protective rib cage. Taught me how to move through shadows, how to kill silently, how to recognize threats before they fully materialized. And through it all the twin bond grew stronger. It started as emotions bleeding across the connection. No rare satisfaction when I executed a technique correctly, my frustration when I failed. But gradually it deepened. Sometimes I caught flashes of his memories. A childhood spent learning to fight before he could properly walk, Armen's careful tutelage, the hollow ache of always feeling incomplete without understanding why. One night, after a particularly brutal training session, Norair pressed his hand to his chest and said, I felt it my entire life. This emptiness. Like half of me was missing. I thought it was just the hybrid nature. Something broken in how I was made. But it was you. The bond severed when Mother took you away. I felt it too, I admitted. Never fitting anywhere. Never feeling whole. He looked at me then with something approaching vulnerability. The werewolf side, you can't let the tribunal see it. They already view vampires who consort with other species as weak. A hybrid with wolf blood is an abomination in their eyes. But it's part of who I am. Part of who you are too, whether you acknowledge it or not. His expression shuddered. I am vampire. Nothing else matters. But I could feel the lie through our bond, could sense the part of him he'd buried so deep he'd almost convinced himself it didn't exist. 2 weeks into my captivity, because that's what it was regardless of Armen's gentle words, he presented me to his court. The vampires gathered in a ballroom that looked like it hadn't changed since the 18th century, all candlelight and ornate mirrors that reflected nothing when the undead passed before them. I wore a gown Armen had provided, midnight blue silk that made my skin look pale as moonlight, and stood beside Norair as Armen made his announcement. My children, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. Norair, whom you know, and Yuliya, his twin sister, returned to us after being hidden for her protection during the turbulent years following her birth. The court erupted in whispers. Most of the vampires looked shocked but accepting. Their king had spoken and questioning him openly was unthinkable. But I noticed the ones who didn't react, who watched me with calculating eyes that promised future problems. A female vampire stepped forward from the crowd, elegant in emerald silk with dark hair piled in elaborate curls. Yuliya Corvinus, Norair had told me. A counselor who'd served Armen for 2 centuries and harbored ambitions of expanding her own power. How wonderful, Yuliya said, her smile not reaching her eyes. We thought both hybrid children had died. Such a relief to learn one survived. The way she said hybrid made it sound like disease. Indeed, Armen replied with perfect courtesy. Yuliya will be staying at the estate while she acclimates to our world. Yuliya's gaze raked over me, assessing, and I fought the urge to bare my teeth. Of course. I'm certain we'll become great friends. Through the bond I felt Norair's warning. Don't trust her. She's been trying to undermine Father for decades. You're an opportunity she'll exploit. After the presentation, as vampires circulated through the ballroom in elegant social dances I didn't understand, I noticed Yuliya in whispered conversation with several other court members. Their eyes kept finding me, and something in their expressions made my newly awakened predator instincts scream danger. The full moon came 3 weeks into my stay. I felt it rising like a second heartbeat, my skin prickling with energy that had nowhere to go. Armen had anticipated this. He'd prepared a reinforced chamber deep in the estate's bowels, walls inscribed with symbols that supposedly contained supernatural transformations. It will be painful, he warned as Savak locked the heavy door. Your vampire nature will fight the change. Try to breathe through it, try to maintain your sense of self. Maintaining my sense of self turned out to be impossible. The transformation hit like a freight train. My bones cracked and reformed, muscles tearing and rebuilding, skin erupting with fur that smoldered where it touched my vampire-cold flesh. I screamed, but the sound came out as something between a howl and a shriek, a noise that belonged to no natural creature. Through the agony I felt Norair's presence in my mind. He was in the adjacent chamber, and through our bond one realized with horror that my transformation was triggering his. The werewolf heritage he'd spent 26 years suppressing was rising to answer the moon's call, and his vampire nature was fighting it just as violently as mine. Make it stop, I begged through the bond, not sure if I was talking to him or myself. I can't, he sent back, his mental voice tight with pain. God, Yuliya, I can't control it. What emerged from our transformations wasn't vampire or werewolf but something else entirely. I saw my reflection in the chamber's reinforced glass. A creature with a wolf's powerful frame but a vampire's predatory grace, fur that seemed to absorb light, eyes that glowed with both crimson and gold. Stronger than either parent species. Faster. More dangerous. Armen stared at us through the observation window, his ancient face pale even by vampire standards. Magnificent, he whispered. And absolutely terrifying. We remained locked in those chambers until dawn, until the moon released its hold and we collapsed back into human form. Savak brought us clothes and blood, both of which we consumed without speaking, too exhausted for words. It was Savak who brought the first piece of truly terrible news. "Sir," he said to Armen, his scarred face grimmer than usual. "I've discovered evidence that Counselor Yuliya has been communicating with the Crimson Tribunal. She's provided them with detailed reports of Yuliya's abilities, her hybrid nature and—" He paused, glancing at me. "Descriptions of the transformation we witnessed last night." Armen's expression turned to stone. "How long has she been reporting?" "Since the day you presented Yuliya to the court. Maybe before." "There's more, sir. The tribunal has moved up their session. They'll arrive in 1 week, not 3. They're calling it an emergency inquiry into supernatural law violations that threaten the established order." 1 week. I had 1 week to prepare for a trial that would decide whether I deserved to exist. The second piece of terrible news came at dawn. A messenger arrived at the estate gates. A young werewolf who looked terrified to be standing on vampire territory. He carried a simple message written in bold strokes. "Armen Vartan, Vampire King of New Orleans. Return Gianna's daughter to her mother's people, or we will take her by force. She is werewolf blood, werewolf heritage. She belongs with us, not among vampire parasites who would corrupt what remains of her humanity. You have 3 days to comply. After that we come for what is ours. Constantine Voke, Alpha of the Crescent Pack." Armen read the message twice, then burned it in the fireplace with deliberate calm. "So," he said quietly, "the werewolves want you. The vampires want you dead. And we have 1 week to convince ancient, inflexible judges that you deserve to live." He looked at me with something approaching pride. "Welcome to supernatural politics, daughter. I hope you're ready for war." Through the bond, I felt Norair's grim determination mixing with my own fear. Whatever was coming, at least I wouldn't face it alone. Not anymore. They arrived at midnight because of course they did. Vampires had always had a flair for dramatic timing. The Crimson Tribunal materialized in Armen's ballroom like a nightmare given form. 3 figures who made even the ancient vampire king seem young by comparison, carrying the weight of millennia in their eyes and the scent of old blood on their elegant clothes. Cassius Draven entered first, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He looked like death's architect, skeletal thin with papery skin stretched over bones that had forgotten warmth centuries ago. His eyes were black pits that reflected nothing, and when he moved, it was with the careful precision of something that had outlived its own humanity so long ago the memory of it had turned to dust. "Armen," he said, his voice like wine through a crypt. "It has been too long." "Cassius. I wish the circumstances were different." Armen stood before his throne. Yes, he actually had a throne for occasions like this, with Norair and me flanking him. I could feel my twin's tension through our bond, his certainty that this would end badly. The second tribunal member swept in on Cassius's heels, Vittoria Sangre, whose name literally meant blood, and who apparently took that as a personal motto. She was beautiful in the way poisonous things are beautiful, with crimson hair that fell to her waist and eyes like liquid garnets. Power radiated from her in waves that made my newly awakened vampire instincts want to bow, to submit, to acknowledge a superior predator. "So," she said, her gaze finding me with laser focus, "this is the little abomination that's caused such a stir." I felt Norair stiffen beside me, but Armen's warning hand on my shoulder kept me from responding to the insult. The third tribunal member entered last, Lucien Noir, who looked almost disappointingly normal compared to his companions. Dark-haired, average height, with eyes that shifted between brown and black depending on the light. But there was something in the way he moved, the way he observed everything with quiet intelligence, that suggested depths I couldn't begin to fathom. "Let us begin," Cassius intoned, settling into the chair Savak had prepared at the head of the room. "Armen Vartan, you stand accused of harboring an abomination, a hybrid creature that violates natural law and threatens the purity of our species. How do you answer?" "I deny the accusation entirely," Armen said, his voice carrying the authority of a king who'd ruled New Orleans for longer than America had existed. "My daughter is not an abomination. She is evolution. The proof that vampires and werewolves can create something stronger than either parent species." "Stronger, perhaps," Vittoria said, examining her nails with calculated disinterest. "But at what cost? Hybrids are unstable, unpredictable, impossible to control. They don't fit into our carefully maintained order. They're wild cards that could expose our entire world to human discovery. Then allow me to demonstrate her control, Armen replied smoothly. Yuliya, if you would. This was the moment we'd been preparing for. I stepped forward, feeling every eye in the room on me, and called upon the vampire abilities Armen and Norair had drilled into me over the past weeks. Speed first. I moved across the ballroom in a blur too fast for human eyes to track. Strength next. I lifted one of the antique chairs with a single hand, holding it aloft as easily as a feather. Enhanced senses. I recited the heartbeats of every living being in the estate, identified the vintage of the blood Vittoria had consumed before arriving, pinpointed Savac's position 3 floors above us. Impressive, Lucien said quietly, speaking for the first time. For a vampire. But we've heard reports of other traits. Werewolf traits. Perhaps you'd like to address those. My stomach dropped. Through our bond, I felt Norair's surge of protective fury, but before either of us could speak, Talia Corvinus stepped forward from where she'd been lurking in the shadows. If I may, honored tribunal, she said, her voice dripping false concern. I feel compelled to present evidence that contradicts the king's claims of control. She produced a crystal orb, some kind of recording device I'd never seen before, and activated it. Images sprang to life in the air above us. Me transforming during the full moon, fur erupting from flesh, my hybrid form emerging in all its terrible glory. The tribunal went very still. Explain that, Cassius said to Armen, his voice cold as the grave. Before Armen could answer, the estate's alarms erupted. Savac burst into the ballroom, his scarred face showing actual fear for the first time since I'd met him. Sir. Werewolves breaching the perimeter. At least 30, maybe more. Constantine Voke is leading them personally. During a tribunal session? Vittoria's eyes flashed with rage. The insolence. Her words cut off as the ballroom's French doors exploded inward. Werewolves poured through, massive creatures in full transformation, all fur and fangs and murderous intent. And leading them was a monster that made the others look like puppies. Constantine Voke in his alpha form, 10 feet of muscle and rage with eyes that promised death to anyone who opposed him. Give me the girl, he roared, his voice barely human. She belongs with her mother's people. Chaos erupted. Armen's vampire guards engaged the werewolves, supernatural creatures clashing in a display of violence that made my earlier training sessions look like gentle sparring. Blood splattered across the marble floors, both red and black vampire and werewolf mixing in pools that smoked where they met. 3 werewolves broke through the defensive line, heading straight for me. Instinct took over. I didn't think, didn't plan, just moved, vampire speed carrying me forward. But when I struck, it was with strength that exceeded pure vampire abilities. My hands shifted mid-swing, claws erupting, and I tore into the first werewolf with a ferocity that shocked me even as I committed to it. The hybrid nature I'd been trying to hide roared to the surface. I felt my bones shifting, my muscles restructuring, fur rippling across my arms even as my vampire speed increased. I became something between forms. Not quite vampire, not quite werewolf, but a fusion that was somehow more than both. I ripped through the 3 werewolves like they were paper. When I turned back to the tribunal, covered in blood that wasn't mine, my hybrid form on full display, I found Cassius staring at me with something approaching horror. But Vittoria was smiling. Magnificent, she breathed. Absolutely magnificent. And absolutely too dangerous to allow to exist. Through the chaos, I spotted Norair engaging Constantine directly. My twin was holding his own, but barely. The alpha outweighed him by 300 pounds of muscle, and pure vampire abilities weren't enough against a werewolf of Constantine's caliber. I felt it through our bond, Norair's decision, his acceptance, his willingness to finally stop denying half of what he was. He transformed. His hybrid form erupted in a display of power that made mine look restrained. Platinum fur mixed with pale vampire flesh, his eyes blazing with both crimson and gold. And when he struck Constantine, it was with force that sent the alpha werewolf crashing through a stone pillar. Brother, I breathed, feeling his triumph and terror mixing through our connection. The battle raged for another 10 minutes before Armen's forces finally drove the werewolves back. But when the smoke cleared and the bodies were counted, I realized with horror that Constantine had achieved his real objective. Gianna was gone. A single message, scrawled in blood on the ballroom floor. Your daughter for your lover. The Bayou. 48 hours. Come alone or she dies screaming. Cassius rose from his chair with deliberate slowness, somehow having remained untouched by the violence. Well, that was illuminating. I believe we have all the evidence we need. The hybrid creatures, he said, gesturing to Norair and me with one skeletal hand, are clearly abominations that must be destroyed. However, he paused, something that might have been amusement flickering across his dead features. Tradition allows them one final chance. Trial by combat. They will face our champions. If they survive, they've proven their right to exist according to the old laws. If they fail, he shrugged. The problem solves itself. When? Armen demanded, his composure cracking for the first time. Tomorrow at sunset, Vittoria said. Here in your ballroom, since it's already covered in appropriate amounts of blood. 3 champions against 2 hybrids. Should be quite entertaining. The tribunal began to leave, but Lucien lingered, catching my eye and making a subtle gesture toward the gardens. A request for private conversation. I found him 20 minutes later among Armen's roses, looking almost human in the moonlight. You're going to refuse the trial, he said without preamble. You're going to try to save your mother instead. How did you? As I would do the same. Family before politics always. He turned to face me fully. I've been working to reform vampire law for 3 centuries. Trying to drag our species into modernity, to acknowledge that purity doctrine is killing us slowly. You and your brother, you're the proof I need that change is possible. That evolution isn't death. So you'll help us? I'll do what I can during the trial to ensure your brother survives. But you need to make me a promise. If you live through this, if you save your mother and survive Constantine, you'll use your position to push for change. Allow hybrids. Recognize werewolf-vampire unions. Force the supernatural world to adapt or die. I didn't hesitate. I promise. He smiled, and for just a moment, I glimpsed the idealist he must have been before centuries of disappointment ground him down. Then go. Save your mother. I'll keep your brother alive until you return. I found Norair in the training room, bandaging wounds that were already healing. Through our bond, I felt his grim determination, his certainty that we were both going to die in the next 48 hours. I have to go after Mother, I said. Constantine will kill her if I don't. I know. He didn't look up from his bandages. Which means I'll face the trial alone. 3 champions against 1 hybrid. Fantastic odds. Norair. Don't. He finally met my eyes and I saw fear there mixed with acceptance. We both know what has to happen. You save Mother. I survive the trial. And maybe if we're very lucky and the universe decides to stop hating us, we both live to see tomorrow. Armen found us like that. His children finally reunited, already preparing to separate again for battles that would likely kill us both. I can send forces with you, he said to me. Savak and 20 of my best. Constantine said come alone. If I bring vampires to werewolf territory, he'll kill her the moment he smells them. I looked at my father, this ancient king who'd lost me once and was about to lose me again. I have to do this alone. Then I stay here, Armen said, his voice breaking. I stay here and watch my son fight for his life because I can't be in 2 places at once. I can't protect both my children. Again. The word again held 26 years of regret. You protect Norair, I said firmly. He's been yours for his whole life. Let me save the mother who sacrificed everything to keep me safe. Norair crossed the room, pulled me into an embrace that surprised us both. Through our bond he shared a memory, the 2 of us as infants sleeping curled together before Gianna fled with me. Complete. Whole. The way we were meant to be. Don't die, sister, he whispered against my hair. Don't die, brother, I whispered back. Then I was leaving, slipping out into the New Orleans night with nothing but my hybrid abilities and a desperate hope that I could somehow save my mother, survive a werewolf alpha who wanted me dead, and return in time to watch my twin brother fight for both our lives. 48 hours until Gianna's execution. 24 hours until Norair's trial. And a lifetime of regret if I failed at either task. The bayou at midnight was a primordial thing, all Spanish moss and black water that reflected the moon like broken glass. I moved through it with supernatural silence, every sense extended, tracking the pack scent that would lead me to Constantine's stronghold. Through the twin bond, I felt Norair preparing for his own battle miles away at the estate. His fear mixed with mine, our hearts beating in sync despite the distance. "Don't die," I sent through the connection. "I need you to not die." "Same to you, sister," came his reply, tight with tension. "The champions are entering the ballroom now. They look like they've been killing things since the dawn of time." "Then be unkillable," I sent back and pushed forward into werewolf territory. I found Constantine's camp on an island deep in the swamp, 15 structures built from salvaged materials, surrounded by werewolves in both human and wolf form. And at the center, tied to a post like bait, was Gianna. My mother looked terrible, bruised, bloodied, but still defiant in a way that made my chest ache. She'd sacrificed everything to keep me safe, and now I was walking into a trap to return the favor. "Yuliya, no!" she screamed when she saw me emerge from the trees. "It's a trap. Run." "I know it's a trap," I called back. "I came anyway." Constantine materialized from the largest structure, his human form somehow more intimidating than his wolf shape. He was massive, 6'6" of scarred muscle, with eyes that held the weight of decades of leadership and loss. "The hybrid daughter," he said, his voice like grinding stone. "You're brave. Stupid but brave. Did you bring the vampire king as requested?" "I brought something better." Armen stepped out of the shadows to my left, Savak emerging from my right. "I brought myself and a very angry second-in-command who's been wanting to fight werewolves for the past century." Constantine's expression darkened. "Gianna said you'd come. That you'd never let your daughter face this alone, even though I explicitly said." "You're not the only one who makes demands, Alpha," Armen interrupted, his voice carrying centuries of command. "Now release Gianna or I turn this entire camp to ash." "You can't." Constantine gestured and suddenly the trees were full of werewolves. Easily 50 of them, maybe more. "You're outnumbered. Outmatched. And you're standing in the heart of my territory. You have no power here, vampire." At the estate, through the bond, I felt Norair's battle begin. The first tribunal champion struck. A vampire who'd been old when Rome fell, and my twin barely managed to deflect the blow. Pain lanced through our connection and I gasped. Constantine noticed. "Distracted already? How disappointing." "Just processing information," I managed. "Here's what I know. You weren't always Alpha. You were Gianna's betrothed 27 years ago, before she fell in love with a vampire king. This isn't about supernatural law or hybrid abominations. This is about revenge. Wounded pride. You want to punish her for choosing Armen over you." The silence that followed was deafening. "Smart girl," Constantine said finally. "Gianna was promised to me. We were supposed to unite our packs, create a dynasty. And then she threw it all away for him." He spat the word like poison. "A vampire. A corpse who plays at being alive. She betrayed everything we were supposed to be." "She fell in love," Gianna said from her post, her voice steady despite her injuries. "Something you never understood, Constantine. You wanted property. Armen wanted a partner." Silence. Constantine's roar echoed through the bayou, sending birds fleeing from the trees. He turned back to me, visibly struggling for control. "You want your mother? Fine. Here's the deal. Kill the vampire king. Prove your loyalty to your werewolf heritage. Show me you choose your mother's people over vampire parasites. Do that and you both go free. And if I refuse? Then I execute her right now and my pack tears you and your vampire companions apart." Through the bond, Norair was losing. The three champions fought with coordination born of millennia together, and even his hybrid abilities weren't enough. I felt his ribs crack, his shoulder dislocate, his certainty that he was about to die. I didn't have time for Constantine's games. "Here's my counteroffer," I said, feeling my hybrid nature rising. "Fight me. One-on-one. You win, you get whatever revenge fantasy you've been nursing for 26 years. I win, you release my mother and end this vendetta." Constantine smiled, and it was a terrible thing. "Accepted." He transformed mid-lunge. The alpha werewolf form crashed into me like a freight train, and I let my own transformation surge forward. Hybrid strength met alpha fury, vampire speed dancing with werewolf ferocity, and the bayou erupted into violence. Constantine was stronger, more experienced, fueled by decades of resentment. But I was different. Unpredictable in ways his wolf instincts couldn't anticipate. When he expected me to dodge, I used vampire speed to get inside his guard. When he adjusted for speed, I met him with werewolf strength that matched his own. We tore through the camp, destroying structures, scattering pack members, locked in combat that was as much about ideology as survival. He represented the old ways. Separation, purity, hatred for anything different. I represented evolution. The proof that different bloods could unite rather than divide. At the estate, Norair was dying. I felt it through the bond, his strength failing, his healing factor overwhelmed by damage accumulating faster than he could repair it. The champions were toying with him now, demonstrating to the tribunal that hybrids were weak, unworthy, destined to fall before vampire purity. No, I sent through our connection, pouring every ounce of strength I had into him. You are not weak. You are not unworthy. You are my brother and you will not die. Something clicked in his mind, acceptance of what he truly was. Not vampire. Not werewolf. But both, and that made him more. Through the bond I felt his power surge. His hybrid form erupted fully for the first time, no longer fighting his dual nature but embracing it. And suddenly the tide of battle shifted. In the bayou, Constantine sensed my distraction and capitalized. His jaws closed on my shoulder, tearing through fur and flesh, and I screamed. And that's when Gianna's sister arrived. Rada Praskovia led a force of 20 werewolves through the trees, all of them wearing expressions of grim determination. She was younger than Gianna, with the same amber eyes but a gentler face, and when she spoke, her voice carried alpha authority. This ends, Constantine. The old grudge, the vendetta, all of it. The pack has voted. We want peace with the vampires, not war. And we certainly don't want to murder a girl for the crime of being born. Traitor, Constantine snarled, releasing me. You betray your own kind for vampire-loving filth. I betray you, Rada interrupted. For being so consumed by wounded pride that you'd sacrifice our entire pack's future for revenge. Step down or I challenge you for alpha right here and now. Constantine looked around at his assembled pack and realized with visible horror that most of them stood with Rada. Only a handful of the most extremist werewolves remained loyal to his cause. He'd already lost and he knew it. Fine, he spat. Take the girl. Take Gianna. Take your pathetic peace with vampires. But when the old ways return, and they will, don't come crying to me for salvation. He disappeared into the bayou, the few loyal wolves following him into exile. Rada cut Gianna free while Armen and Savak secured the area. My mother collapsed into my arms, and we held each other while supernatural politics swirled around us. You came, she whispered. Of course I came. You're my mother. At the estate, Norair defeated the final champion. I felt his triumph through the bond, his exhausted relief, and then horror. Because Cassius Draven was standing, moving toward my wounded twin with execution in his ancient eyes. The hybrid survived, Cassius said, his voice carrying to me across the miles through Norair's heightened senses. But survival doesn't negate what you are. Abomination. Perversion of natural law. You will die anyway. No, I sent through the bond. Hold on. I'm coming. I ran. Vampire speed combined with werewolf endurance let me cover miles in minutes, but it still felt like hours. Through the bond, I felt Norair's desperate attempts to defend himself despite injuries that would have killed a normal vampire. Felt Lucien Noir trying to intervene, arguing legal technicalities. Felt Armen's rage at seeing his son threatened again, powerless to stop a tribunal member. I burst into the ballroom covered in bayou mud and Constantine's blood, Gianna and Rada and their werewolf supporters at my back. Cassius had Norair by the throat, lifting my twin off the ground with one skeletal hand. Stop. My voice cracked like thunder. I invoke the right of challenge. Ancient law. Any vampire may challenge tribunal decisions through personal combat with the presiding judge. Cassius turned those dead black eyes on me. You dare. I dare. Fight me. Prove that hybrids are weak and deserve execution. Or are you afraid an abomination might actually win? He dropped Norair, who collapsed to the blood-slicked floor with a groan I felt through our bond. Then Cassius smiled, a terrible expression on his corpse face. Very well. Traditional challenge. No weapons. To submission or death. To submission, Lucien interjected quickly. The old laws don't require death for challenges within the tribunal itself. Cassius inclined his head fractionally. To submission then. He was the oldest vampire in existence. He'd survived longer than civilizations, outlasted empires, perfected violence into an art form practiced for thousands of years. But I was something he'd never fought before. The battle was brutal and short. Cassius had technique, experience, the kind of perfect economy of movement that came from centuries of refinement. I had adaptability, vampire speed when he expected werewolf strength, werewolf fury when he anticipated vampire tactics, combinations he couldn't predict because nothing like me had ever existed before. I fought with everything Armen had taught me, everything Norair had drilled into me, every survival instinct my hybrid nature provided. And when Cassius finally went down, when I had him pinned with claws at his throat, the entire ballroom held its breath. "Yield," I said quietly. "Please. I don't want to kill you. I just want to exist." For a long moment, those ancient eyes stared at me with something approaching respect. Then, I yield. The ballroom erupted. Lucien Noir stood immediately. "The challenge is won. By ancient law, the tribunal's decision is overturned. The hybrids have proven their right to exist." He looked at Vittoria, who nodded slowly, and at Cassius, who remained on the floor beneath me. "Very well," Vittoria said. "Let it be recorded. Yuliya and Norair Vartan are recognized as legitimate members of vampire society, with all rights and protections thereof. Any who challenge this ruling challenges the tribunal itself." I released Cassius and went to Norair, pulling my twin into an embrace while the supernatural world rearranged itself around us. The weeks that followed were a blur of negotiations and new beginnings. Rada officially became Alpha of the Crescent Pack, the first to formally recognize peace with Armen's vampire court. Constantine remained in exile somewhere deep in the bayou, his influence broken. Lucien Noir began his reforms, starting with official recognition of hybrid kind and protections for supernatural interspecies relationships. Armen and Gianna didn't rekindle their romance. Too much time had passed, too much had changed. But they built something new, a co-parenting relationship between a vampire king and a werewolf mother, united by love for their impossible children. I stood in my mother's modest house one last time, packing the few possessions I wanted to keep from my old life. The waitress uniform went in the trash. The books, the photos, the little pieces of the girl I'd been, those came with me to my new life at Armen's estate. Norair found me there, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. The twin bond hummed between us, fully restored, no longer the hollow ache of incompleteness but the warm certainty of connection. "Ready?" he asked. "Almost." I touched the watch locket at my throat, the artifact that had changed everything. I'd added to it over the past weeks. Now it held photos of all four of us. Armen and Gianna, Norair and me, no longer separated by war or secrecy or impossible choices. We drove to the estate together, and when we arrived we did something vampires normally never did. We walked out onto the balcony and watched the sunset together. Our hybrid nature allowed it, this unique gift of being able to exist in both day and night. "We're impossible," Norair said, his shoulder touching mine. "According to every law that's governed the supernatural world for millennia, we shouldn't exist. And yet here we are." I smiled, feeling the last rays of sunlight warm on my face. Proof that impossible is just another word for evolution waiting to happen. Below us, Armen stood in his study, watching his children with an expression that mingled pride and wonder and deep relief. He'd lost 26 years, had made impossible choices that still haunted him. But his children were alive, together, and finally whole. That night, we established the first hybrid sanctuary. A place in the Garden District where others like us could exist safely, could learn to master dual natures, could prove that being half and half didn't make you broken. It made you complete in a way purebloods could never understand. I was no longer just Yuliya Praskovia, the waitress who served coffee and wondered why she never quite fit. I was Yuliya Vartan, hybrid bridge between worlds, proof that different bloods could unite rather than divide. I was my father's daughter, my mother's child, my brother's twin. And most importantly, I was myself, whole and powerful and exactly what everyone said was impossible. The watch locket rested against my heart, no longer a mystery but a promise. That family was worth fighting for across any boundary, that love could survive separation and war and impossible odds, and that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you could do was simply exist as your authentic self. Half vampire, half werewolf, completely whole, and absolutely unstoppable. Thank you for watching. We hope you sure enjoyed every bit of the story. Don't forget to click that subscribe button, like the video, and tell me where you are watching from. Also click on the image on your screen to watch more beautiful, heartwarming stories and stay updated with our latest content.